The Ghost of the Library? Hello friends, welcome to the Horror Ghost Stories. The story begins. The library was eerily quiet, with the only sounds coming from the occasional rustle of pages or the low hum of the overhead lights. It was the kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, as if something unseen was watching. I had never been inside this old, run-down library before, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt an odd pull, as if the place was drawing me in. The library was vast, stretching on for what seemed like miles. The shelves were old, the wood worn and dark with age, and the air had a musty, damp smell. It wasn't the most inviting of places, yet there was something compelling about it, something that whispered to me from the shadows. I was alone, or so I thought. There were no other patrons, no staff. Just me and the rows upon rows of ancient, leather-bound books. The deeper I ventured, the more I noticed the odd details. The books were arranged in strange patterns, not according to subject or author, but in ways that seemed deliberate, as though they were leading me somewhere. I stopped in front of a particularly thick, dust-covered tome. Its cover was dark, nearly black, with gold lettering that shimmered faintly despite the dim light. The title was barely visible, but I could make out something like the lost words. Curiosity gnawed at me. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cover, and as soon as I touched it, a cold chill ran down my spine. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably, and a low creaking sound echoed from somewhere deeper within the library. I pulled my hand back, but the feeling lingered, like an invisible presence was now watching me. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching longer. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But when I turned to leave, I realized that the layout of the library had shifted. The shelves had rearranged themselves, the aisles now winding in impossible directions. My heart began to race as I looked around, panic rising in my chest. The entrance I had come through was nowhere to be seen. I started walking faster, searching for an exit, but no matter how many turns I took, the library seemed to grow larger, more labyrinthine. The silence was suffocating, and the shadows seemed to whisper to me. It was as though the place was alive, and it was toying with me, trapping me in its endless maze. As I rounded another corner, I saw something at the far end of the aisle, a figure, pale and translucent, standing in the dim light. It was difficult to make out its features, but I could tell it was watching me, its head tilted slightly as if studying me. Frozen in place, I stared at the figure, unable to move or speak. A cold wind blew past me, though there was no breeze, and I heard a whisper, barely audible. It was a voice, but it wasn't human. The words were indecipherable, a string of sounds that sent a shiver down my spine. The figure began to move, gliding effortlessly through the shelves toward me. I tried to step back, but my feet were rooted to the floor. It was as if some force was holding me there, keeping me in place, unable to flee. As the figure drew nearer, I could make out its features more clearly. Its face was gaunt, hollow-eyed, and its skin was pale, almost translucent. It wore an old-fashioned librarian's uniform, but the edges of its clothes were frayed and decaying, like the figure itself was a remnant of the past, brought back to life by the library's dark magic. "Do you want to know the secret?" the figure asked, its voice a soft, hollow whisper that echoed in my mind. I wanted to scream, to run, but no sound escaped my lips. The figure reached out a skeletal hand, touching my arm. The cold that spread through my body was unbearable, and I could feel my mind begin to unravel, as if the very essence of my being was being pulled from me. The whispers grew louder, clearer, until they became one word repeated over and over again, forever. In that moment, I understood. The library wasn't just a place of knowledge, it was a prison, a timeless cage that trapped souls who dared to enter, keeping them in its dark, endless maze for eternity. The figure before me was just one of many, doomed to walk these halls forever, lost to the world outside. And then, as if it had never been there, the figure vanished. The cold receded, and the library returned to its stillness. But I knew, deep in my bones, that I was no longer alone. The library had claimed me. I tried to move, to find an exit, but the aisles stretched endlessly before me. The shadows whispered my name, beckoning me deeper into the dark corners of the library. I had become part of the collection, a lost soul among the books. And no matter how hard I tried, I could never escape. The hours passed in a blur. Time had no meaning here. I was stuck, endlessly wandering the labyrinth of shelves, searching for an exit that would never come. The whispers followed me, and I could feel the presence of the librarian watching from the shadows, waiting for the next soul to fall victim to the library's curse. I had become a ghost of the library, doomed to wander its endless halls, forever trapped in the pages of its dark history. The longer I wandered through the twisting aisles of the library, the more I began to lose sense of time. The once quiet silence of the place was now filled with the eerie hum of something just beyond my understanding. It was as if the walls themselves were breathing, and every shelf, every book, was alive with a hidden history waiting to consume me. The dim lights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The deeper I ventured, the more I could hear them, the whispers. Soft at first, like the faint rustle of pages being turned, but then they grew louder, more insistent, until they seemed to be speaking directly to me. I couldn't make out the words at first, but their meaning was unmistakable. They weren't just words, they were commands. Turn back, one voice urged. Leave this place before it is too late. But another voice, lower, raspier, replied, you cannot leave. You belong to us now. My feet felt as if they were dragging, weighted down by the oppressive air of the library. Every step felt like a battle, as though the ground itself was resisting me, pulling me deeper into the labyrinth of shelves and ancient tomes. I tried to call out, to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the walls. There was no sound, no escape. Every shelf seemed to hold a different world, a different story. I would pass a shelf, and then, almost as if by magic, a book would fall from it, landing with a thud on the floor in front of me. I would pick it up, mesmerized, but every time I opened the pages, the words were written in languages I could not understand. Symbols and shapes that twisted and writhed before my eyes, as if they were alive, shifting with a life of their own. I started to notice something strange about the books. Their covers seemed to change the longer I stared at them. One minute, a book would appear to be leather-bound, its cover smooth and pristine, and the next it would be decayed, its edges frayed, the pages yellowed and brittle with age. It was as if the books themselves were trapped in a loop of time, their appearance constantly shifting between past and present. The whispers became more distinct now, though still incomprehensible. They seemed to come from every direction, filling the space around me. As I walked, the shelves seemed to change their positions, the aisles stretching and winding in impossible directions. It was as if the library itself was a living organism, shifting and growing around me. Suddenly, a book caught my eye, a large, black-bound volume resting on a pedestal at the center of a small, dimly lit alcove. Its pages were completely blank, save for a single word etched into the first page, read. I hesitated. Something about the book felt wrong, but I couldn't resist. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I opened the cover. The moment my eyes touched the empty page, the room around me seemed to shudder. The air grew thick and heavy, and a cold wind swept through the library, extinguishing the flickering lights. The shadows grew darker, deeper. It was then that I heard the soft, almost imperceptible sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from behind me. I turned quickly, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing there. The aisles were empty, just rows upon rows of books stretching off into the darkness. I spun around again, but the book was gone. A chill crept down my spine, and I realized that I was no longer alone. The librarian, the spectral figure I had encountered earlier, was still here. But now, it was different. It was no longer just an apparition. It had become something far more terrifying. I could feel its presence, just beyond the corner of my vision. It was watching me. Its hollow eyes, dark and empty, seemed to burn with a malicious intent, as if it were studying my every move, savoring my fear. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, and bumped into one of the shelves. It groaned in protest, and then, as if it had been waiting for me to touch it, the shelf began to move. The books on it started to shift, their spines cracking and bending as they slid off their resting places and tumbled to the floor. I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in around me, the space narrowing until I was trapped in a small, dark alcove. Panic surged through me. I tried to move, to run, but the very ground seemed to resist me, pulling me down, rooting me in place. My feet felt as though they were sinking into the floor, as if the library itself was claiming me. Then, I heard the whisper again, this time clearer than ever, its tone heavy with the weight of an ancient power. "You are part of the collection now." The words echoed in my mind, reverberating through every fiber of my being. It was true. There was no escape. The library had claimed me, just as it had claimed the others before me. I was nothing more than another lost soul trapped in its endless corridors, my name erased from the world outside. The librarian's figure appeared before me once again, its translucent form more solid now, its hollow eyes gleaming with a cruel satisfaction. It raised a finger to its lips, a gesture that sent a chill of dread through me. "Forever," it whispered. I tried to scream, to fight back, but my body betrayed me. My limbs grew heavy, my vision blurred, and I could feel myself slipping away into the shadows, becoming one with the library, one with the endless maze of books and whispers. And so I wandered, aimlessly, through the dark halls, a part of the library now, my soul bound to its twisted halls. The hours turned into days, the days into weeks, the weeks into years. Time lost all meaning in this place. All I could do was drift from aisle to aisle, searching for an exit that would never come. I was no longer the same person I had been when I first entered this place. The library had changed me, had consumed me, like it had done with so many others before me. And as I walked, I heard the whispers again, louder now, echoing in the darkness. "Another has come," they said, their voices filled with hunger. "Another soul to add to the collection." And I realized with a jolt of horror that I had become just another part of the library's eternal curse, another ghost lost among the endless shelves of forgotten stories. The longer I remained trapped within the library, the more I began to understand the true nature of the place, a place far darker than I had ever imagined. The walls were not merely made of stone and wood, they were alive, pulsating with an ancient energy that thrummed beneath the surface, waiting for the unwary to wander too far. Each shelf seemed to grow heavier with age, and the air itself felt thick, laden with something oppressive. It was as if the very structure of the library had been built to hold the spirits of those who had come before, each soul condemned to a never-ending existence among the labyrinthine rows of books. I could feel the weight of the past pressing in on me, 1,000 souls trapped in this place, their faint cries for help lost to time. The voices that had whispered to me earlier had multiplied, now an overwhelming chorus of despair. They came from everywhere: the books, the shelves, the very walls themselves. At first, the whispers were soft, like wind brushing through the leaves of a tree. But as I ventured deeper into the labyrinth, the voices grew louder, more insistent, until they were shouting, calling out to me in agony. "Don't let it take you!" One voice cried. "Flee while you still can." Another voice, twisted and guttural, whispered, "You cannot leave. None leave." The words were haunting, but they were not meant to comfort. They were meant to remind me of my fate. I was already becoming one of them, one of the countless lost souls who wandered these halls, trapped by the library's insidious grip. The longer I stayed, the more I could feel myself slipping away from the person I had once been. My memories were beginning to fade, like pages in a book, their edges fraying and curling with time. I clutched my head in my hands, desperate to hold on to who I was, but it was as if the library itself was draining the very essence of my being, replacing it with the endless knowledge of its books. The knowledge was intoxicating, seductive. I couldn't resist it. Every corner I turned, I found another book, a thick, leather-bound tome with no title, its pages filled with dark secrets. I couldn't stop myself from opening them, despite the warnings I had heard. As soon as I touched the first page, I felt the room around me shift. The library itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if the very heart of the building was alive. The books began to whisper to me, their voices growing louder, a cacophony of voices all begging for my attention. "Read," one voice murmured. "Learn what you must." But it was not the desire to learn that haunted me. It was the knowledge that every book in the library contained the soul of a person who had been claimed by it, each one a prisoner within the pages. The library wasn't just a collection of books, it was a prison. A prison that trapped not just the body, but the soul, ensuring that its victims would never escape. The deeper I went into the heart of the library, the darker the books became. They were no longer just filled with knowledge, they were filled with lives. As I opened one, I saw flashes of faces, people who had once walked in the world outside, now reduced to nothing more than fragments of memories contained within the pages of the book. A woman, her eyes wide with terror, a child reaching for something just out of their grasp. A man, his face contorted in agony, his fingers curled as if trying to claw his way out. And then, there were the whispers, names, dates, and places, all disjointed, all confusing. The voices began to blend together, their identities becoming less distinct as the years passed, but I could feel their presence around me. I could feel their fear, their hopelessness, and I realized that I was slowly becoming one of them. I tried to leave. I ran, pushing past shelves, knocking over books in my haste, but every path I took seemed to lead me deeper into the library's labyrinth. The aisles twisted and turned in impossible directions, the shelves stretching to infinity, an endless maze of wood and dust. I thought I saw the entrance once, a faint light glimmering in the distance, but when I approached it, the light flickered and vanished, swallowed by the shadows once more. I had become hopelessly lost. The library seemed to know my every move, as though it was aware of my presence, aware of my fear. I could feel it watching me, its eyes hidden in the shadows, tracking my every step. And then I realized there were eyes everywhere. Not just in the shadows, but within the books themselves. They watched me, judged me, and in their silent, knowing gaze, I could feel the terrible weight of the library's curse. I reached a small alcove, and there, on a pedestal, lay another book. This one was different from the others. It wasn't old or dusty, but fresh, as though it had been placed there recently. The cover was made of something strange, almost like skin, and the title was embossed in gold letters, The Last Story. I felt compelled to open it. The pages were blank at first, and I thought perhaps it was a trick, some cruel joke played by the library. But as I stared at the empty pages, I saw something begin to form. Words. Slowly at first, as if being written by an invisible hand, and then faster, more urgently, until the pages were filled with a story. My story. I read, my eyes widening in disbelief. The words on the page were my thoughts, my fears, my memories. It was as if the book had known everything about me, every moment of my life, even before I had stepped into the library. The book began to write my future, my inevitable fate. It told of how I would be trapped forever, wandering the library for eternity, just as so many others had before me. I tried to close the book, to stop reading, but the words kept coming, spilling out onto the pages as if they could not be stopped. I could feel my will slipping away. The more I read, the more the book seemed to take control of me. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, until they became one single, deafening scream. You are the next chapter, they cried. You are the final page. And then, the book slammed shut, and the world around me went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the same alcove, the book before me, its pages now blank once more. But something had changed. I had changed. I could feel it. The part of me that had been human, that had once known the warmth of the sun and the comfort of the world outside, was gone. All that was left was the hollow, empty shell of a soul, forever bound to the library. The library had claimed me, as it had claimed all those before me. And now, I too was part of its collection. I would never escape. I would never leave. I was a ghost, just another lost soul drifting through the endless aisles of forgotten knowledge. And the library would never let me go. Now, as I walk these cursed halls, I know that my story will be written again and again, for anyone who dares to enter. Another victim, another soul to add to the collection. The cycle will never end. The library will always hunger for more. And I, like so many before me, will be lost among its endless rows of books, forever. The end.